welcome back to Voice of Islam, the platform that's giving you international scholars and speakers from all around the world, subhanallah, every single day, plus Quran at your, understand Quran classes every single day as well afterwards. Alhamdulillah. Hope you guys have been enjoying this series so far. And today, we're not going to disappoint you, inshallah. We've got somebody from all the way from Greece, aka also known as the UK, actually, because that's where he is right now. And I think he's sitting in his garage by all accounts, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
His name is Hamza Tzortzis. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, Sheikh?
Alhamdulillah, how are you?
Good, bro. Can't complain.
Good.
We must always be eternally grateful.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, subhanallah. Of course, a lot of you will know Hamza from his discussions and his dialogue with people who are not Muslims, otherwise known as atheists, and logical approaches to how we should discuss Islam, how we should disseminate the beautiful message of Islam to people who do not know about it. Subhanallah. And also Hamza has been formerly still part of course, I-Era. And alhamdulillah, also done a lot of work studying recently. And he's gone back to formal studies and is now doing, I think, his doctorate. He's doing his PhD, I believe. And we're going to hear more about that. He's written a couple of books at least. I think he's planning on writing some more as well, inshallah, to protect the beautiful name of Islam, alhamdulillah. And that's, of course, an obligation for us if we believe. So, Hamza, how's Ramadan been, first of all, for you?
Ramadan's good, but just a quick correction. I'm doing postgraduate research. I'm yet to get into the PhD program, but it's like a pathway towards that, inshallah.
Yeah.
So Ramadan so far has been really good. To be honest, Allah has made it really, really easy. And it's been quite interesting with the lockdown and COVID-19. You know, like with many tests and many trials, there's always almost an infinite number of blessings that come with them. So some of these blessings include you're with family more. You're starting to realize the finite nature of your existence. You're pondering more on the akhirah rather than the dunya. You are taking a little bit more seriously the fact that you have to face one day your personal apocalypse, yeah, because you're not going to be around forever. So therefore you have to be spiritually prepared, and you have to take your ibadah, your worship, much more seriously. So there's always blessings for the Muslim. You know, whether it's a calamity, whether it's a fitna, whether it's a trial or tribulation, there's always khair. Because our theology is a positive theology. We believe that behind everything is a good, divine, wise purpose. You know, as Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century theologian, he basically said that, you know, even behind, you know, noxious substances, even behind, you know, things like suffering and evil, there's always some type of grand, cosmic, divine, good purpose behind it. And that's why in Islam, we don't really believe in absolute evil. We believe in objective evil, that is objective based on the variables, but in the grand cosmic scheme of things, we don't believe it's absolutely evil because it's based on a divine, good, wise purpose. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for that correction as well. I haven't spoken to you that much recently, so I didn't know how far you'd progressed.
You're too busy.
Eh?
You're too busy, Habibi. You're too busy, mashallah.
As long as we're too busy for the right reasons for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Absolutely.
I know that's something you have been, alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you in your pursuit of knowledge and enable you to benefit from it and to benefit others, inshallah. Hamza, you know, a lot of your work has been focused around sort of logical reasons why human beings out there, people from the wider community that we're talking to from the platform of Voice of Islam is why should they, or do they have good reasons to believe, or should they just go about their lives the way they are, many of them, and just ignore it, put their head, proverbial head in the sand thing? There's the answer.
Well, yeah.
Here's the answer.
Yeah. I think the rooster has given you the answer. Now, well, in summary, and we could get into detail if you want to probe, we have so many good reasons to believe. I mean, you could start first and foremost by having a kind of fitra approach to this issue. Fitra meaning the innate disposition that Allah, the Creator, has created something within us to already acknowledge Him and already acknowledge the truth. So from that perspective, you know, Islam is intuitive and is rational. It's intuitive, it's natural and rational. And someone who has an open mind and has a sincere heart, when they approach the tradition, it would be an inevitability for them to basically come towards the deen. Because what's the deen really based on? It's fundamentally based on the fact that there is an ultimate purpose for our existence. And this makes so much sense because human beings, we are purpose-driven creatures. When we engage together, when we brush our teeth, when we drive a car, it's for a particular purpose. And we may attribute purpose for the things we want to achieve in life, like I want to be a doctor or engineer. Now, isn't it weird that many of us attribute purpose to these actions, but we don't attribute an ultimate purpose for our existence, which basically means that there is an intention and objective for our existence. Now, for me to do that, it's irrational. It's equivalent of saying, let's pretend to have purpose. It's a self-delusion because you're attributing purpose to all your actions in your life and the things that you want to achieve. But you're saying, you know what? For the basis of my existence, there is no purpose. And this is no different from saying, let's pretend. It's like kids when they're playing in the playground at school or at home and they pretend to be doctors and nurses or cops and robbers, right? That's what it is. That's how they're treating life. So the idea of having an ultimate purpose makes sense. And then that follows, well, what is our purpose in life? And, you know, from the Islamic point of view, our purpose is to worship the divine. What does worship the divine mean? It means to know God, to love God, to obey God, and to direct all acts of worship like gratitude to God. Now, technically, if you think about it, even if you don't believe and even if you're an atheist, you're worshiping something because you always want to know something at some point in your life the most. You're always going to love something the most at one point in your life the most. You're always going to obey something or refer to something the most at one point of your existence. And you're always going to maybe show ultimate gratitude towards something the most. Well, that's your object of worship. And that's why it's very interesting. Martin Lings, he basically said that man cannot not worship, meaning that you're always in a state of worship. So the question follows, well, who is worthy of worship? That's the point. Who is worthy of worship? And Islam addresses that big question. The Quran came down to announce God to mankind and to explain why Allah is worthy of worship. But every time when Allah talks about the sun and the moon and the stars and the natural phenomena, they're there to affirm the natural conclusion that there is a divine there's a divine wisdom and power in the universe in order for you to conclude that He is worthy of our love, our adoration, and worthy of our worship. So in summary, that's Islam. And that's a natural take on reasons to believe. But we also have a huge intellectual tradition where we are standing on the shoulders of giants, where we have proofs for the God's existence, for His oneness, for the revelation of the Quran, for the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these are detailed in a logical and coherent way. But I just want to add before maybe we go into detail, there is a difference between a kind of abstract philosophy and Islamic thought, right? So traditionally, Islamic thought was, yes, being intellectual, being rational, but your assumptions and your premises had to be based on Kitab wa Sunnah, on the Quran and the Sunnah. The blameworthy type of philosophy that was basically characteristic of a kind of Hellenistic approach, that blameworthy philosophy, it wasn't blameworthy because they tried to think hard or to be clever, because Allah tells us to use our minds, but it was blameworthy because the assumptions that they carried could not be found in the Quran and the Sunnah. So there is a distinction between blameworthy philosophy and what I like to call Islamic thought or Islamic philosophy, if you want to use such a word. But the word itself has been quite muddied throughout Islamic history. But generally speaking, when you hear many scholars say, oh, philosophy is not good for you, they don't mean being articulate, being intellectual, using good rational arguments. What they mean is using an argument that is based on assumptions and principles that cannot be found in the Quran and Sunnah. So even the rooster agrees. So from that point of view, I wanted to make that clear, because we have a kind of, unfortunately, and not very smart approach to this point, and you have a lot of name calling, and it's very important to make it clear. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah, he would praise some good things from people that he thought were on the blameworthy camp, because Ibn Taymiyyah, not only Ibn Taymiyyah, but also the Salaf, the pious predecessors, they never denied rational arguments. They actually praised them, and they said they would confirm what the Quran says. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah, he has a famous statement that the sound aql, a sound intellect, is always going to agree with the Quran, is always going to agree with revelation. There is no distinction between a sound intellect and the Quran. I wanted to make that clear, just to,
No, perfect. Jazakallah khair. That's absolutely amazing, Hamza. Jazakallah khair for that. Can I just ask you, though, go back a little bit, because you talked about, you talked about this concept of worship. Yeah, in the West, this concept is like, has been. A lot of people just think, well, I'm not a slave. I mean, I'm in control of what I do in my life. How would you, justify using this term, worship, in this context?
Well, yeah, of course. Well, I'll get them to think about their own life in an existential way. I mean, at the end of the day, many of us, we worship our own selves. This egocentric culture, right? Allah says, have you not seen the one who takes his own desires as his Lord? And you see that everywhere. I mean, look, there are some leaders of very famous nations, not to mention any name, it's all about me, and I'm right. Everybody else is wrong. Because what is the nature of the ego, of the nafs? It's, I always want to be right, and I never want to be wrong. I always want to look good. I never want to look bad. I always want to impose. I never want to be imposed upon. And you do that to the degree where you reject the truth. You do that to the degree where you reject, all these virtues. And that is the ego. This is, the kibr of shaitan. So a lot of us, we worship our nafs from that point of view. Not only this, a lot of us, we love, adore, and obey celebrities. That's our object of worship, right? If Justin Bieber, he basically comes out and says, I'm drinking some smoothie, all of these teenage girls are going to start buying and drinking smoothies, right? This is a form of adoration, a form of obedience, And think about it. People even worship concepts. Like, you have this idea of freedom. Freedom is like this sacred cow, It's this sacred cow. And not that we reject it, of course, but it is to the degree what people want to become absolutely free. But if you think about it, and Martin Lings makes a really good point, he says absolute freedom is an attribute of the divine, because he is al-ghani, he is the free, he is the absolutely independent and rich. So in our pursuit of us becoming freedom, that's really our yearning for the divine. But because we have ignored him, we end up worshipping these false concepts, right? So I would just basically say people are enslaved to a materialistic lifestyle. People are enslaved to their own ego. And by the way, it's not just atheists or non-Muslims. Even Muslims, unfortunately, can fall into this as well. And we have to be very honest, because even the concept of kufr has grades, isn't it? Because kufr can also mean ingratitude, and a Muslim can be ungrateful. Obviously, there are theological implications for the words, but the point I'm trying to say here is that there are grades of this, and even sometimes Muslims can fall for this. Like, for example, many Muslims are nationalistic, asabiyya, and that could end up being your sacred cow, right? If you love your nation state more than Allah, if you love the leaders of your nationalistic movement more than the Prophet ﷺ, if you obey the dictates of your nationalistic creed more than anything else, well, my friend, that's your object of worship, right? So you're right, and it's very good you raised that question. So, but the way to articulate with them is just basically to probe and ask people questions in a very nice and compassionate way. Like, for example, sometimes asking a question like, what do you mean by that? I mean, how would you feel if, or why don't you consider this? Or, that's an interesting perspective. However, this is how I see it. So if you have this kind of conversational coffee shop approach, which is the approach I really...
Hello. Assalamu alaikum, Hamza. I think stopped him mid-flow there. Yeah, he's frozen, probably. Maybe the chicken pecked him to death on the... I'm only joking. Right, okay, so Hamza will come back, inshallah, mid-flow in a really, really excellent answer there, relating to, worship and why we should, of course, all be people that naturally yearn to worship the ultimate, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Walaikum salam.
Back again.
Good.
Yeah, so
fantastic.
We thought the chicken ate you.
So
well, they're not fasting.
I was saying about having conversations, very compassionate, probing type of conversations, natural, organic conversations with people, to ask them questions about how would you feel if, or ask them questions such as, it's an interesting perspective. However, I see it that way. What do you think? Having these type of conversations, it could create awakenings within people, so they understand, actually, there is something that I love the most in my life. Because you could take the logic of what I mentioned about worship and just ask it as a question. For example, what is the thing that you love the most in your life? What is the thing that you refer to the most in your life? What is the thing that you want to know the most in your life? What is the thing that you have ultimate gratitude towards most in your life? And basically, if they fill in the gaps, that is the object of worship. So what we need to try and show to people is, well, yeah, those things, maybe you should do that to a certain degree, but ultimately and maximally, from a human perspective, you should do it to the divine, because he is worthy of worship. And then you should show them why he's worthy of worship. And I think that's a very powerful approach, because, I have been known to debate philosophical things like atheism and stuff like that. But my foundational approach is actually this now. I like to go straight to the worship issue, because this is the Quranic approach. This is the Anbiya. This was the call. And it's very rational and intuitive. And you make people think about their life in a very profound way. Like, yeah, maybe, I do have an object of worship. If it's true that worship means loving something the most, knowing something the most, obeying something the most, and expressing gratitude, ultimate gratitude towards something the most. Oh my God, that is my object of worship. But maybe I should be worshiping the divine. Why? Because he is worthy of worship, and then you could have that discussion.
But going back to the sort of atheist worldview, if it is a worldview, it's probably a selfish view. It's not a worldview. But thing is, how do they justify saying that the universe itself somehow creates and manages itself? Is there any basis for it? Because a lot of people out there, particularly young Muslims, growing up in the West, going to universities, are now questioning their faith.
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, sometimes I'm very reluctant of putting a whole category of people into one position, because it's not necessarily true that all atheists believe that the universe, that they have an answer. Many, they say they have a skeptical position. We don't know. We just know up to a certain point, and we're still investigating. However, if you're talking about the kind of popular position that the universe came from nothing, that's obviously a joke. No, basically, because we understand that what does nothing mean? It means that there was nothing in existence prior to the universe. Also, it means that there was no prior causal activity, that there is no potential, right? And this is very important. We have to make those clear distinctions. So when you're saying something comes from nothing, you're saying there is no prior causal activity, no potential, and there was nothing before that thing when it came into existence. Now, to accept that is reduces everything to absurdity. It's called reductio ad absurdum, right? You reduce everything to absurdity. Why? Because if you're willing to accept that an entity like the universe could come into existence without any prior causal activity, without anything before it, then you should be willing to accept that for every single explanation in your existence. For example, the bank manager of Richard Dawkins should call him and say, "You just lost all your millions from writing your fiction books." And he'll be like, "Oh my God, how did that happen?" And then the bank manager will be like, "Well, it happened because of nothing." Is that going to be a valid explanation for Richard Dawkins? I mean, let's be honest. Also, an interesting way of looking at these things is to do a logically mirror people's statements. So if people say, well, the universe will come from nothing, that could also mean that the building that you're sitting in at the moment, it could disappear without any prior causal condition. It could disappear from nothing, right? Via nothing. It would just, and you should be okay with that explanation. You should be able to walk down your high street, look at the supermarket, close your eyes, count to 5, and after 5, the supermarket disappears. And when it disappears, you should be intellectually satisfied that you don't need a reason for it disappearing, and it disappeared because of nothing. And this is why you have to show the logical implications of such silly statements from that point of view. Yeah. So, you know, the universe did not come from nothing from that perspective, because it requires a prior causal activity. And it doesn't have to be material activity, but there has to be some kind of prior causal activity. And otherwise, you have to admit that you don't need an explanation for anything. You could say, you could actually be bizarre explanations for so many different things in your existence. And it just reduces the whole of reality to a ridiculous notion. And this is interesting. It actually undermines science itself. Because what is the job of science? The job of science is to seek out explanations, is to seek out the causes. Yeah. But all of a sudden, just because you don't like the implication of this conclusion, you just basically turn off your scientific brain and you come up with some bizarre things, or you start redefining the notion of nothing like Lawrence Krauss did. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you know, and we show this to people. But I truly believe, though, that having such a position, really, it's not an intellectual position. It's a psycho-spiritual position. They have already made up their mind of what God means. They don't like that idea. And therefore, they will now develop a philosophy that goes against the idea. So for many people, from my experience, they just don't like the idea of God, and they don't want to worship the divine because, I don't know, they've had some kind of problems at home because of religion, or because they've had negative experiences with religious people, which, you know, we should admit, because we don't always do a great job. So there's so many psychological causal factors of why people actually have certain positions. So we can't be very binary in a very, not everything's a debate. Yeah. We have to probe into the psychological mechanisms. For example, in my town, someone spoke to me and said, "Oh, I saw your debate, it was good, whatever, but I'm still an atheist." Now, I just judged from the person because I got a bit of an experience. I didn't deal with that question. I basically said to him, "How's your mom and dad?" And you won't believe it. He started telling me about some of his problems or issues with his mom and dad, from what I remember. Yeah. So you could see that a lot of these things have psychodynamic issues. Let me give you another story. You're going to love this, bro. I think I was in the University of Portsmouth or Southampton. I was giving a lecture, and an atheist, a Pakistani atheist who did a master's in quantum physics, I believe, he came up to me and he said, Hamza, your argument for God's existence doesn't make sense because causality doesn't make sense outside of the universe. Now, because I have a bit of a philosophical background, I was like, okay, you know, this guy obviously doesn't do his philosophy very well. Let me ask him a question. So I said to him, "What do you mean by causality?" And he was a bit stumped, because if you look at Western metaphysics, causality, there's a massive ikhtilaf. It's crazy, yeah? They haven't solved the problem. What is the nature of the causal link? And he was like, at the end, saying, "I don't know." And I said, "Listen, bro, isn't it interesting that you used a word that is key in your sentence to deny God, but you don't know what that word means? What's really going on? What's really going on?" And then I sat him down, and I was very brotherly and nice to him. And he basically exposed the fact that when he prayed before, when he was Muslim, he couldn't really connect to God, because I think he had a secular understanding. He didn't have that connection. So do you see? So behind all of this intellectual bakwas, yeah, there are other things going on sometimes. I'm not saying it's always the case, because it could be the case that it's a genuine question. But generally speaking, a lot of these things are based on psychology, and that's why dawah, if you think about it, is fundamentally based on psychology. I was reading a prophetic tradition yesterday where there was someone who nominally became Muslim, and he wanted to take revenge and kill them. And the Prophet put his hand on his chest, and he said, "Ask for God's forgiveness." And then he said, after that day, nothing was more beloved to me than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not always what you say is better. And what does that which is better mean? The ulama say that which is better means that which is more virtuous and that which is more beautiful. So we must become people of virtue and people of beauty. And the hadith I just mentioned, I paraphrased a lot, but it's from the book that was launched in New Zealand called On Being Human by Dr. Usman Latif.
Yeah, very good book, alhamdulillah. Just to go a little tiny bit deeper then, just because a lot of people out there are beset with these this philosophy that, or this, not a philosophy, these theories that okay, well, the universe came from a multi-universe, a multiverse. Okay, this is the first bit. And the second thing is about evolution. So I want you to address the two things, because I was watching actually a Disney cartoon the other day, and they were literally going through the universe. I can't remember what the name of it was, but they were going through the universe and explaining it to all the kids. And so they're trying to popularize this. I mean, when you turn on the BBC, right? The BBC, it literally says, it popularizes Darwinism and the idea that the universe did come from this complex set of bakwas, whatever you'd like to call it, multiverse, or this highly complicated thing that nobody can understand, that therefore we don't believe in God. So how can you come back to a person who has that view and explain it?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, yeah? So the first thing we need to the first thing we need to unpack, which is very important, is we need to ask ourselves a question. Do we have a problem with ideas such as the multiverse and even the Big Bang? Do we have a problem? Fundamentally, not really, unless they go against theological principles, and our thought and our philosophy. So the idea of a multiverse is not necessarily something that is un-Islamic, yeah? We should follow the science as much as possible, yeah? Yes, science changes. We're not going to accept it as the gospel truth, right? The Quranic truth. But, we'll accept it to a degree. What we reject is the false inferences that are made from these theories and these speculations. Now, fine. Say someone says there is a multiverse. Well, that doesn't deny God's existence. How does a multiverse deny God's existence? It doesn't in any shape or form. Because these multiverses are what you call still contingent. In other words, they're dependent. They have limited physical qualities. They are not necessarily existing. What does that mean? That means that they are contingent. It could be that it was possible for them to have not existed. Therefore, they require an explanation external to themselves to explain their existence. They have limited physical qualities, and anything with limited physical qualities requires an explanation external to it. Because for example, look at me. I have limited physical qualities. I have a limited mind. I have a limited beard. I have a limited t-shirt. It's a certain color. It's a certain size. I'm a certain height. These are limitations. I didn't give rise to my own limitations. There was something external to me, a set of factors or an ultimate explanation that explains my limited physical qualities. And that applies to the multiverses. And this is so you still require an explanation for these multiverses. You still require something external to them to explain their contingency, to explain the fact that they have limited physical qualities and all of these things that we just mentioned.
Okay.
The other thing is, what kind of model of the multiverse model are you going to be taking? This is ikhtilaf. Why do we get so upset about these theories and we get like, oh my God, this is going to damage my faith? It doesn't. There's still healthy debate around these things. For example, the kind of, from what I understand, the mainstream approach to the multiverse is that there's a multiverse generator, right? Now, if the multiverse generator can produce even one universe like ours that has complex life, that was designed in a particular way with complex conscious life, then it means that the multiverse generator must be designed as well from some point of view. If that's the case, well, who designed the multiverse generator, right? It's like having a toaster, right? And you basically, this toaster is giving you these infinite toasts. They're coming out one by one. And one of those toasts somehow comes up and it's written on it, a Shakespearean sonnet, yeah? In order for that toaster to be able to do that, the toaster requires a designer. So all they're doing is they're shifting, design to another up another level. So it doesn't really undermine anything. Yeah. The other thing you mentioned was about evolution. Now this is a little bit more problematic. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the approach I take because, the first thing we need to be clear is just because something is called a theory, it doesn't mean it's bad science. In actual fact, and we have to be very clear, we have to correct our beloved brothers and sisters that talk about this in the dawah, that when in scientific terms, when someone says theory, that actually means something that is very well confirmed from an empirical point of view. It has explanatory scope, so it explains most of the data, and it has explanatory power, meaning it gives rise to predictions, good predictions, right? It has predictive power. So a theory in scientific terms is, you can't mess with it, yeah? If you mess with it, then you need to provide a better explanation scientifically. If you can't, then you should just stay shush, yeah? So, but we use the word theory in a way that you would read, for example, an investigative novel about, a detective novel, that he had a theory about how that person died, and they're trying to investigate that, yeah, or something like that. They use it in a colloquial way. But when you're saying theory in science, that's a very high, it's epistemic value is high, meaning its value of knowledge is up here, yeah? You can't mess with it.
Yeah.
So the Darwinian mechanism is one of those theories. So the approach that I like to take is an instrumentalist approach, which I think is the approach of the classical Islamic tradition. And that's why we have to be connected to our intellectual tradition in order to deal with these issues. So what's the instrumentalist approach? The instrumentalist approach is science is useful and we will use it. And we will use it to the degree that it doesn't go against the Quran and Sunnah. Once it goes against the Quran and Sunnah, we still use it practically, but we don't bring it into our aqidah. For example, let me use the Darwinian mechanism as an example. The Darwinian mechanism is a well-established theory. It's a well-confirmed theory. However, even in saying that theories have high value scientifically, they still suffer from certain issues. What do they suffer from? They are, number one, probabilistic. What does that mean? It means that you can have observations today or in the future that can contradict your theory, okay? And therefore you have to change your theory. Even Richard Dawkins says this in his book, A Devil's Chaplain. He basically says that in the future, we may have evidence that can totally change the Darwinian mechanism. We may reject it altogether, he says, yeah, along those lines. So it's probabilistic. And the reason it's probabilistic because science is fundamentally based on something called inference, or the inductive inference, or an inductive argument. What is an inductive argument? Very simply put, it's based on limited data and you conclude for the unknown. For example, if I go to New Zealand and I want to investigate what are the color of sheep, right? And I count 1 million white sheep, I'm going to conclude that all sheep are white, or the next observation of sheep is going to be white. That's an inductive inference. Is probabilistic because we know that can't be true, because we know now we've seen black sheep, and black sheep now go against our theory or go against our inference that sheep are white. This means that there can always be another observation that can contradict your previous conclusions. Simple as that. So that's why it's probabilistic. So it's not absolute. It's not Quran and Sunnah, yeah? The second thing, the Darwinian mechanism is based on assumptions, right? Every theory has philosophical assumptions, and that's why they have to work. In actual fact, science has philosophical assumptions. For example, if you read the works of many philosophers of science, take, for example, Samir Okasha, he says that basically a fundamental assumption of science is that nature is uniform. Why do you have to have nature being uniform? because your theories won't be able to be applied to all of the data, because you can't observe everything. But since you have a good theory, you could now say, well, that applies to all of the phenomena that the theory addresses. Let me give you an example. Say, for example, they say that the Darwinian mechanism is true. This explains biological change, and they've confirmed it to a certain degree. It makes sense of different things. Now they say Darwinian mechanism is an explanation for all biological change. But the thing is, they haven't observed all biological change. We haven't investigated what 90% of the sea. Now, but the reason they can make that conclusion, is based on the philosophical assumption that can't be really be proven, which is that nature is uniform. So when you come to Darwinian mechanism, there are some assumptions, philosophical assumptions they hold. For example, gradualism. Gradualism is one of those philosophical assumptions, and I suggest you read The Philosophy of Biology, read the atheist philosopher of science, Elliot Sober. He discusses these things and others. So that's number two. It's based on assumptions. Number three, there are disputes, right? Just like healthy science is going to have disputes. And what's very interesting here is, if you don't have disputes, then you end up having a dogma. And if you have a dogma, then that becomes very anti-science. And it's very interesting that, you know, the neo-atheists like Dawkins and others, they accuse Islam from being very dogmatic. But they're very dogmatic with the Darwinian evolution. Anyone who has any different perspective is like, no, how can you say such a thing? And this is why, you know, we have to expose that contradiction. So yes, even though the Darwinian mechanism may be the most well confirmed from a scientific consensus point of view, it's still probabilistic. It still has assumptions and it still has disputes. Now, I'm not saying this to reject science. I'm saying this to understand science as science should be understood by mainstream scientists and by mainstream philosophers of science. That's why even Professor Brian Cox from the UK, very famous professor of science, he even says, you know, from what I understand, he said, you know, science can change. So from this point of view, if this theory is probabilistic, has assumptions, and is based on disputes, why would you now take it into your aqidah? So if it does go against the Quran and Sunnah, then why would you feel that somehow it's going to be problematic to your faith? It shouldn't, because the minute you know that it's probabilistic, based on assumption, has disputes, then just understand it practically. And that's why the practical approach is, I'm still going to practically use the Darwinian mechanism to discover antibiotics and save lives, because Allah says if you save one life, it's like saving the whole of humanity. But it doesn't mean it's absolutely true. And the other thing that we need to understand is, someone would argue, hold on a second, but it works. If it works, it must be absolutely true. Now, this is false. It's a logical fallacy. Just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. Let me give an example with the history of science. In the philosophy of science in the 1700s, in the history of science in the 1700s, you had this theory called phlogiston. What is phlogiston? Phlogiston was that if you had something that can burn, that is combustible, it would release phlogisticated air. Now, Dan Rutherford in 1772 or 1773, he used this theory to discover nitrogen. But then we realized that although we discovered nitrogen, this theory was actually false. So what does it teach us? It teaches us that you can get a truth from a workable theory that is actually false. So it doesn't follow that just because something works, it must be true. So the way to deal with the Darwinian mechanism is not just to refute it, is to basically say, fine, this is where human beings, this is our current limited understanding at the moment. Some aspects of it goes against the Quran and Sunnah. So I'm not going to accept it into my aqidah, but I can accept it practically and work with it because it produces some things that are really good. But in knowing that, it doesn't mean it's true, because you could get some good things and some fruits of science, and you get some truths from theories that are not ultimately true, that are based on falsehood. And I'm going to use it practically, and I don't have to take it into my aqidah, because I know that human knowledge is a pixelated understanding of reality. Allah has the picture, we just have a pixel. So we just have to be humble and appreciate that and say, you know what, it's not absolute. I don't take this into my aqidah, but I'm going to use it practically because that's what the mainstream people are doing.
Well, that was my point, that most people have just sort of accepted it and go with it and don't challenge it, because when they do challenge it, then they're in between a rock and a hard place, because really they don't have enough knowledge to challenge it. Whereas, I wanted to share this front cover of a book which you might know very well, The Divine Reality. So guys, I think that if you want to read more about what Hamza is studying and disseminating in his dawah, The Divine Reality, God, Islam, and the Miracle. Is that the mirage of atheism, actually, not the miracle of atheism? It is a miracle. It is a miracle, actually.
The book is free. You could basically, if you go to onereason.org, you could download it for free, or you could order it. You just have to pay for shipping. So it is free. The newly revised edition is actually free if you go to onereason.org or if you go to ira.org. So yeah.
Perfect. And very finally, I know we've only got a few minutes, but can you just overview, because some people are asking about the linguistic miracle. They love the linguistic miracle of the Quran. I mean, I know you can't do it in justice in 2 or 3 minutes, but if you can, try to just summarize it for people out there.
Well, maybe we should do a future session on this, because it's a very important session.
Yeah.
So look, there's many ways you could address this, but I address this to a non-Arab audience, okay? So the way I like to articulate this is, you could understand that the Quran is a linguistic miracle even if you don't know alif, ba, ta, right? Even if you think Chinese is Arabic and Arabic is Chinese, yeah? And the way to do that is based on 2 things. Is to firstly understand that the best Arabs at the time of revelation were Arabic linguists par excellence. They were the best at expressing themselves in the Arabic tongue. They reached the peak of Arabic eloquence. And the Quran came down and challenged them. Now, very interestingly, the Quran not only challenged them from a linguistic point of view, because Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 23, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you're in doubt about that which we have sent to our servant, referring to the Prophet ﷺ, then bring one chapter like it and call on your witnesses and supporters besides Allah if you're truthful in your claim. So not only was there an intellectual linguistic challenge, but there was a challenge that basically the Quran challenged the kind of ethos of the society. You know, it challenged misogyny. It challenged basically corrupt practices and unjust economic distribution. And it challenged all of these things. So the Quran became a social force that undermined the very fabric of that unjust society. All they had to do, the greatest linguists of the time, all they had to do is produce 3 lines like it, the smallest chapter, which is Surah Al-Kawthar, just 3 lines like it. But they didn't. But what they did, they resorted to war and to boycott and to all of these crazy things. But all they had to do is produce something like it. This shows that even though they had the motivation to challenge the Quran because it was undermining their society, they failed to do so. So if the greatest Arab linguist failed to do so, then who is it from? We could now really make some kind of logic. Well, it came from an Arab, it came from a non-Arab, it came from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or it came from the divine. We know it couldn't come from the Arab because the best Arab linguists failed. And today's Arab, they live in a heterogeneous linguistic environment. There's lots of linguistic borrowing. If you go to Egypt and you want to say, where is the phone? They may say, Aina telephone. Yeah. So they basically, there's linguistic borrowing and they don't have the same natural eloquence. It couldn't come from a non-Arab because even Allah says, this is Arabiyyun Mubin. This is pure, clear Arabic. And we know it couldn't come from the Prophet ﷺ because every human expression, if you have the blueprint for the human expression and the tools available, you can always replicate it. We see this with reverse engineering. We see this with artwork. There's some replicas of Monet and other artists that sell for a great amount of money because they have the tools at their disposal and they have the blueprint. Every human expression, if it is a human expression, once you have the blueprint and the tools, you can actually reproduce it. But when it comes to the Quran, we have the blueprint, which is the Quran itself. We have the Arabic language, the finite 20 Arabic letters, but we can't exhaust them to produce anything like the Quranic discourse. So it couldn't come from an Arab, it couldn't come from a non-Arab, it couldn't come from the Prophet ﷺ, therefore it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this is a very, very quick way of doing it. I have a very detailed essay on my website, hamzatzortzis.com, which is called God's Testimony, and it goes in detail articulating the linguistic miracle to people who don't know anything about Arabic.
Yeah, that's the One Reason site, guys, and there's the book there for sale. Money back guaranteed. If you don't like it, get your money back? Nothing.
Zero.
Zero. Like the universe came from zero. Right. So, guys, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you very much, Hamza. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you in this beautiful month of Ramadan, the month of the Quran, the month of guidance, and the month of us coming back and tarbiyah. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow you to continue your work and to create ever greater argumentation for the belief in a divine spirit, the divine creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, I think we definitely need to get you on more shows because we've got loads of questions coming out. We've got one which is from one, I don't want you to answer this actually, but 1 to 100, what is your take on, hold on, let's just ignore it actually, because we haven't got time for it. Just ignore it.
But yeah, Jazakallah khair for the opportunity, and inshallah it would be a great pleasure to come and speak again.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Hamza. Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum.
I mean, you too.
Okay, brothers and sisters, mashallah. So if you want to get more information about that book, particularly I was referring to the divine, reality, there it is there I'll probably share it rather on the screen so that you can see it. Okay, there it is, Divine Reality. That's also Ayra publications are out there, Forbidden Prophecies about Jesus, Life After Death, Making Sense of God, Loving God, Short Journey of the Quran, Eternal Challenge, Divine Reality, which is Hamza's, and The Last Messenger. There we are. You see, there's lots and lots of publications out there that can help you in developing arguments and giving out materials to help people understand these beautiful messages of Islam, inshallah.